Morning, classes. This is Tuesday, May 5th, day 17 of the Civil Rights Unit. Big week grade wise for us. So, some reminders. We've got a test Friday. I've announced the time now that will be between 1 and 2 p.m. That will show up as an assignment, and then you will only have that window to complete it. So we're going to do a practice run with that on Wednesday or Thursday. So there'll be more on that, but I need you to clear out your calendars for Friday at 1 o'clock. And if you can't, you need to talk to me beforehand if there are any conflicts with that. We've got very few notes left for the year. We have one section left for the year. There are not that many notes to take today and just a little bit tomorrow. Then we're done with notes for the year. The next unit will be a PBL, but we do have a formative to do today, one last review worksheet for this chapter today. So we've got some grades coming up. And again, don't forget your document of the week is due this week, or if you're in honors, your thesis for your essay is due this week. So there's a lot of grades going on. We're going to make a good push here for the last month to make sure you know what you need to know going into your junior year. So let's look real quick at what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about how the hippies and the media turned against the Vietnam War. And notice we're not quite doing this yet, but you're starting to have in mind to prepare for the Unit 10 and 11 tests. Maybe you're catching up. Maybe you are going through the formatives. Maybe you're making sure you have your notes out so that when the test happens, you can look up those answers as fast as you can. That is why it's timed. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's pick up with our very last section here. And it is basically a little bit more about the hippies. It's the anti-war movement aspect of what the hippies believed in or fought for. So college students are at the heart of the movement. Honestly, college students were at the heart of the movement for the civil rights movement. Remember, Dr. King created SNCC, Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. So we have, this early recognition of, wow, college students are great foot soldiers for this. And then college students were big in the women's rights movement, in Hispanic American rights or Native American rights, that age group in particular, just 18 to 25. So now we're really going to go back and focus a little bit back on how their initial sort of flexing of their political power was against the Vietnam War. It really all starts on college campuses across the country, particularly on the West Coast, Berkeley, leading a free speech movement. You had a lot of protests emerging early in the Vietnam War on college campuses, and then college campuses clamping down on that, saying, hey, you don't have a right to do that. And essentially, this sounds mean, but treating college kids like high school students. And you say, well, I have rights too, and you do, but we've talked about this before. Being a minor is sort of a tricky spot. In a way, your parents sort of hold your rights for you. And so you can do things differently in a high school than you can at college. Well, on these college campuses, they were sort of treating them like high school students, limiting their freedom of speech as if their parents possessed that right for them. And these college kids said, hold on, we're old enough to get drafted and go fight in that war. We're 18 years old. We are adults in a place that we choose to go to, nothing we're required to go to. You don't have to go to college. And so we are going to exercise our rights. And if you have a problem with that, they might have a peaceful protest, or they might boycott the money going to that college by not going to that college. Remember, you're paying for that privilege. They owe you. You're paying for a service. They should treat you a certain way. And so many students are going to fight for what they believe in using passive resistance techniques, civil disobedience, that they learned from the civil rights movement. Remember, these groups we're talking about in Unit 11 have a lot of crossover with Unit 10. Some of these college students are women. Some of these college students are African American. Some of these college students are Hispanic, and they are a part of this overall movement. And so I'm going to let you skip this group, but like every other, sort of group within society, subgroup, you have a representation of them. So for African Americans, you have the NAACP or CORE or the SCLC. For Hispanic Americans, you have the United Farm Workers. For women, you have NOW. For young people, you had Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, and they were fighting for the right to protest and they were actively protesting the Vietnam War. And they were bringing about a lot of attention, in particular to the draft. Now, this is going to look different to you. These are purple. What this means is that it's fair game on the test, but I've actually already taught this to you in another chapter. So if you remember this, you do not have to write this down. If you don't remember it, please add this to your notes because it's a reminder of things we've talked about before. But remember, the draft was the method of selection for military service. Some could get deferments, putting off that draft because maybe they had an occupation that was very specialized and sought after. Maybe they had some health concerns, or very commonly in this era, maybe you were in college. Now, that brings up some issues because back then it wasn't as easy to get loans and grants to go to college. So essentially, being in college wasn't as much a measure of your academic ability, but oftentimes also a measure of your finances, which doesn't seem like a very fair way to get a deferment out of the draft. Some were simply, like we talked about in World War I and a little bit in World War II, conscientious objectors, people who opposed the war for religious or moral reasons. They did not believe the war in Vietnam was just, and they did not believe that they should have to kill somebody if it was against their moral beliefs to kill another human being. So, how did they respond? Well, some went to jail for their beliefs. To this day, all young men have to register for the draft, and if you refuse to do so, it's a huge fine and 5 years in prison if they catch you before you catch them. In other words, if you forget and you sign back up or sign up a year late or something, there's no penalty. But if they sort you out, you can get 5 years in jail, and I think it's $250,000 penalty. And then when you're out, you have to sign up for the draft anyway. But remember, they haven't used the draft, haven't actually called people to war since 1973. Some people did not want to go to jail, and they simply fled to Canada. One of the last videos we watched before we had to leave physical school was one where they were talking about these protesters who left in the late 60s, early 70s, fled to Canada and have not come back. Now, a president in between that time, Jimmy Carter, a president from 76 to 80, he actually pardoned them, but some people still stayed there. And there were some defections, some people that went to Canada after some wars in the modern era in Iraq. So you start to see the media turn against this war because young people, hippies, SDS, were bringing about attention, bringing about sort of, through their protest, that media awareness. And the media starts to pick up on more and more of this and says, wow, some of this stuff doesn't add up. Maybe this isn't logical. Maybe this isn't a very winnable war. And so there really was a lot of pressure. Now, this is again another purple one. Because of satellite TV technology, you've got images brought from this war right into the living rooms live for the 6 o'clock news, or events that, even if they were recorded, happened that day. And you start to see more and more of a backlash. And you start to see people questioning, is the monetary cost of this worth it? Is the loss of lives worth it? Now, again, a lot of people supported the war, but it really quickly after, remember we discussed the Tet Offensive. By 68, you had a slight percentage more against the war than before it. It's the hippies who really got the ball rolling on that. Um, I'll skip some of the details. I just need the big points there. But anti-war movement expands and to include numerous groups of doves. Some of these were civil rights protesters. Dr. King was a dove. And I put this in purple because we've covered these doves and hawks before. Hispanic American groups like the United Farm Workers were generally against the war because they also thought that the draft was disproportionately affecting Hispanic Americans. And then you had young people in general through SDS who said, wait, our age group is obviously disproportionately affected. And they oppose the war. Remember, hawks support the war. So that's all the notes we have today. Tomorrow, we're going to sort of just finish up with the unfortunate culmination of these college protests. A horrific example called the Kent State Massacre, which occurred right here in Ohio, about an hour, a little less than an hour and a half from Sandusky and Norwalk. So That will finish up our notes for this entire unit. So again, prep for this test. Do the worksheet that's assigned today. That will help remind you of some of those groups. And maybe go over some of those old formatives. I did not close access to any of those. So you can keep taking them, I believe, and make sure that you get the right answer if you so choose to. Uh, but the worksheet will be closed. You get one shot at the worksheet, and I will close that window for that worksheet in about 24 to 36 hours. So you want to make sure you get that done and you are getting ready for this test. Okay. So, everybody, stay safe out there. We will have a really short lecture again tomorrow and absolutely Thursday so that you are getting ready for that test. Make sure you prep. All right. Stay safe.